Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to demystify the complex world of international financial reporting. We really want to look at it not as some rigid, dry set of rules, but rather as the universal language of business. So let's take a deep dive into the 2022 edition of IFRS in Your Pocket, which is basically your ultimate guide to understanding exactly how companies around the globe communicate their financial reality. Think about this quote from the conceptual framework for a second, because it brilliantly illustrates our whole approach today. To actually communicate effectively in these interconnected global markets, investors, regulators, and companies absolutely need a shared vocabulary. They have to ensure that a company's financial story in Tokyo makes perfect sense to an investor sitting in Toronto. And that shared, reliable vocabulary, that is exactly what the IFRS standards provide. So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start by looking at the global accounting language, then peek inside the IFRS foundation, review the conceptual framework, touch on the new requirements for 2022, and finally wrap up with some essential Deloitte resources.
All right, Section 1, the Global Accounting Language. Over 140 jurisdictions. Let that number sink in for a minute. More than 140 places around the world require IFRS standards for all or most of their domestic publicly accountable entities. We aren't just talking about a regional reporting framework here. This is a truly global dialect. Whether you're operating out of Europe, Africa, or Asia, fluency in IFRS is basically a baseline requirement for playing in international markets. When you break down the adoption by region, it's pretty fascinating. Europe is clearly leading the charge with 43 jurisdictions, which is backed by their really strong endorsement process through IFRS. But look at the Americas with 26. Now, the U.S. SEC strictly requires domestic issuers to use U.S. GAAP, right? But they actually allow foreign private issuers to submit financial statements using IFRS standards entirely without a reconciliation. It just goes to show how these major global accounting systems have to constantly interact and understand each other.
Moving on to Section 2, inside the IFRS foundation. So who actually writes these rules? Within the IFRS Foundation sits the International Accounting Standards Board, or the IASB. For years now, this independent group of up to 14 accounting professionals has been solely responsible for the technical content of these standards. They're the ones defining the terms, setting the rules for recognition, and basically ensuring that global financial reporting stays high quality and transparent. But hold on, because there's been a massive shift in the corporate reporting world, and you absolutely need to pay attention to this. The traditional ISAB is now joined by a sister board, the newly established International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB. This is literally historic. It expands our business language way beyond just pure financial metrics, diving right into a brand new sustainability dialect that tackles environmental, social, and governance issues, things that significantly drive a company's value today. And the crucial thing to remember is that creating these standards, whether we're talking financial or sustainability related, isn't just done in some closed-door vacuum. The boards follow a really rigorous, transparent due process. They evaluate requests, hold public consultations, put out exposure drafts for public comment, and only after some intense debate do they finalize a standard, complete with a full effects analysis. It ensures the rules are thoroughly vetted by the global community before they ever become law. Which brings us to Section 3, the conceptual framework. Let's break down the basic elements, starting with the nouns of our accounting language. First up, an asset. In the IFRS world, an asset isn't just stuff you legally own. The absolute keyword here is control. An entity has to have the present ability to direct how a resource is used so they actually get the economic benefits from it. It's all about power and benefits resulting from past events. On the flip side, we have a liability. Think of this as an unavoidable obligation. It's a duty or responsibility that the entity simply has no practical ability to avoid settling. The framework actually points out that even if avoiding the transfer would mean liquidating the entire company, well, that means you still have no practical ability to avoid it. The obligation is present and very real. Then we've got equity. I love this one because it's just so elegantly simple. Equity is quite literally just what's left over. It is the residual interest in the assets once you strip away all those unavoidable liabilities we just talked about. It's the true net baseline of the entity. Next up are the action verbs of our language, the performance side. Income is your upward momentum. It's defined as an increase in assets or a decrease in liabilities that ultimately boosts that residual equity we just defined. And a quick side note here, this explicitly excludes any contributions directly from the holders of equity claims, like issuing new shares. Expenses naturally are the exact opposite. They're the downward pole. An expense is a decrease in assets or an increase in liabilities that shrinks overall equity. Again, completely excluding distributions made to equity holders. Seriously, grasping these 5 basic elements is the absolute key to unlocking how any complex transaction is going to be treated under IFRS. Now, this brings up a classic accounting debate handled right in the framework. How do we actually measure these elements? Do we look backward at historical cost, reflecting the transaction price from the past? Or do we look at today's conditions using current value, like fair value or value in use? The framework doesn't force you into just one box. It states that the choice completely depends on the characteristics of the asset or liability and what's going to provide the most faithful, relevant representation to the folks actually reading the financial statements. All right, moving to Section 4, new requirements for 2022. So, the IASB rolled out a suite of targeted amendments across multiple standards for 2022. Think of these as fine-tuning adjustments. They cover everything from how a subsidiary adopts IFRS for the first time under IFRS 1 to clarifying the exact costs a company has to include when assessing if a contract is onerous under IAS 37. They even updated the rules on property, plant, and equipment proceeds under IAS 16. I do want to put a spotlight on one really important update, though, IFRS 3 for business combinations. The IASB explicitly updated this standard to align its reference points with the newly updated 2018 conceptual framework rather than leaning on the super outdated 1989 version. It also makes it crystal clear that acquirers do not recognize contingent assets acquired in a business combination. It's just a perfect example of standardizing the vocabulary to avoid any mixed interpretations during a merger or acquisition. And finally, Section 5, Essential Deloitte Resources. Keeping up with this evolving language is basically a full-time job. So, first up is the Deloitte Accounting Research Tool, affectionately known as DART. This is your comprehensive web-based library. It gives you super quick access, not just to the full texts of the standards, but to Deloitte's authoritative guidance, interpretations for those really tricky situations, and, most importantly, real-life disclosure examples from all over the world. The real magic happens when you combine these tools. If you use DART's comprehensive IGAAP volumes, which break down everything from financial instruments to insurance contracts, right alongside the massive global news repository of the IS Plus website, you effectively have a complete translation dictionary and newsroom for any ambiguous standard or emerging accounting issue. IS Plus in particular gives you such an incredible edge. It offers dedicated resource pages for the newly established ISSB, incredibly detailed jurisdiction-specific filing requirements, complete histories of what the standard setters discussed, and even e-learning modules for most IFRS standards to help get your whole team up to speed quickly. So, here is the ultimate question I want to leave you with today. As this universal language of business rapidly expands way beyond traditional financial numbers, right into the realm of global sustainability and climate disclosures, is your team truly ready to learn the new dialect?